for the Unit 7 material on the final exam review, this one says find the vertex of the graph. So when I look at the vertex, I'm looking for the highest or the lowest point of the graph. That would be right here. This graph is obviously not numbered a whole lot. There is a couple numbers, so we are going to have to count. So I go over 2, and I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that would be a -9. So D. Looking at the same graph for number 11, find the x-intercepts or the roots of the function. So here I'm looking for the x-axis. Where does the parabola cross? And that would be at -1, 0 and at 5, 0. So -1, 0, 5, 0, that would also be C. Okay, so that's like parts of a parabola. Then in number 12, we learned how to graph parabolas. Very difficult, I think, being online, but please do the best that you can. So the first thing I taught you was that there's an A, a B, and a C in the problem. Okay, secondly, you have to use this equation to get the vertex. Now, this problem is a great example, so please be careful here. If B is a -2 and there is a negative in the formula, you're looking at a double negative here. We know that simplifies to a +2. Then in the denominator we have 2 times A, where A is 1, so 2 times 1 is 2. So if I divide that, we get 1. That represents the x. Okay, so this is your x. So your vertex is 1, something. Okay, now, step 2 says you take that 1 for x and you plug it into all the x's over here in this formula, or in this equation. So x squared is now 1 squared, minus 2 times 1, so in parentheses, minus 3. Okay, 1 squared is 1 times 1, that's 1. -2 times 1 is -2. And then minus 3. So 1 minus 2 is -1. Minus 3 is -4. So that's our y value, -4. So I'm looking for the graph that has 1, -4. So here's 1, -4. Okay, so it's close, but not quite there. All right. So right there, oops, sorry. So I went over 1, down 4. Then I taught you guys there's a pattern. We always use 1, 3, 5. And you multiply this by the A value. So if I multiply by 1, we get 1, 3, 5. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit here. So from the vertex, if I go up 1, right 1, I land on the parabola. Up 1, left 1, I also land there. If I go up 3, I land there as well. So up 3, right 1, up 3, left 1. Okay, so obviously D is my solution here. But it is important to know that you have that x equals -b over 2a as the beginning of finding your vertex. Okay, number 13. This is solving by finding square roots. So this is where I had 3 steps. 1, add or subtract something. I'm going to subtract 18. Okay, so 54 minus 18 is 36. Okay, the second step was divide. So right here, there's only a 1 in front of this. So if I divide by 1, I still get 36. So I don't need to divide here. Lastly, number 3, step 3 is take the square root of both sides. that gets rid of your exponent too. So the square root of 36 is 6, but we had to make sure we put plus or minus, and we wrote it as 6 and negative 6. Okay, so either answer is acceptable, and we can see that here it was chosen to be written as plus or minus 6. Okay, for number 14, it says to solve. Now, I wish it would have said factor and solve, but looking at this, we have that middle term of x. Over here, we didn't have a middle term of x. So this is why we solved it like a two-step equation with square rooting. But here, we have to use x factor. Okay? So we would do 1 times negative 14 is negative 14. Our goal is to get to a positive 5. So going back to the factor sheet, okay, your factors of 14 are 1 and 14 and 2 and 7. 2 and 7 can make 5. But how? Which one would be negative? And it would be 2. Okay, 7 minus 2 is positive 5, and 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. So here, we know we've got negative 2 and 7. I write that in factored form. So this was from Unit 6. Then, in Unit 7, with remote learning, I taught you guys set it equal to 0. And then you set this part equal to 0. And then you set x plus 7 equal to 0. And then you solve each one. So if I add 2, x is 2. If I subtract 7, x is negative 7. So this would be A. Okay, for 15, find the x-intercepts of the graph of the equation. So this is very much like 14. When we did this in notes during remote learning, there was a couple problems where, like, if you were given y equals and you had to solve it, you're just turning that y equals into a 0, and you're solving it like you would normally solve. So we're going to factor. So this is a factor problem. So I'm going to go 1 times 18 is 18. And we're trying to get to negative 11. Okay, factors of 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. So which one can make an 11? And that would be 2 and 9. Because if I add 2 and 9, I do get an 11. But how do I get a negative 11? I make them both negative. Because a negative times a negative is positive 18. If I add two negatives, I keep the negative. So now I would say x minus 2, x minus 9 equals 0. And then I set each phrase here, each section, equal to 0. Because I added 2, 0 plus 2 is 2. I added 9, 0 plus 9 is 9. So I'm looking for 2 and 9. So C. Almost done. So number 16. For this one, just by looking at this answers, I have to use quadratic formula. So I can't x factor like I did over here or up here. Okay? So this answer choice is a dead giveaway. Also, if I did 2 times negative 7 and got negative 14 trying to get to negative 6, none of this can get me to negative 6, right? Like, I can't do 7 minus 2, get to 6. Won't work. 14 minus 1, that won't work either. Okay? So I have to use the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula was this right here. So hopefully you took notes and you have that written down somewhere and you've practiced it. Okay? So before I can plug in, I have to label. So this is my A, my B, and my C. Now this could help or hurt you. Okay? If I know I got a negative for my B and I got to plug it into a negative, it's going to become a positive. So that's the first thing I need to go ahead and do. So let's go ahead and write out what it looks like plugged in. So negative from the formula, but the B is negative. So I got a negative, -6 plus or minus, -6 squared minus 4. Remember, we always put parentheses around this part. So times 2 and then times -7. And then I did 2 times 2. Okay, now, this right here has to be a positive. Okay? Before I move on to anything else, if I look at my 4 choices, this has a negative, this has a negative, but these are both positive. So right away, I'm going to eliminate these. Okay? Okay, now let's keep going. So I got a +6, and 2 times 2 makes 4 down here. Okay, we discussed in the calculator, if you put in -6 squared, it gives you a -36. But I told you guys, make sure you think about it. -6 squared means -6 times -6. You know a negative times a negative is a +36. Okay, then for this part, okay, I got a -4. So I did -4 times 2 times -7. That is a +56. So plus 56. And then I'm going to add 36 plus 56 is 92. All right, now, as you can see, neither of these have a 92. So, what we do is we take the 92 and we break it down. We know that it's an even number. So, I could say, what is 92 divided by 2? 92 divided by 2 is 46. So it gives me 2 times 46. But 46 is an even number. So I can divide by 2, and I get 23. So 2 and 2 and 23 gives me a pair of 2's. So I can replace this right here with 2 radical 23. Okay, so I'm going to write that right over here. So I would say 6 plus or minus 2 radical 23 over 4. Okay, now, if I look at my choices, this looks like the answer, but I'm missing a 2 right here. So that can't be it. So how the heck would they have gotten this, right? Well, look, 6, 2, and 4 can be divided by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Remember, when you have a 1 in front of the radical, you don't need to write it. So right there matches your answer. So that would be D. Okay, we only have 2 left. So for 17, this one's pretty simple. The square root of 144 is just 12. Okay, so that's either going to be B or D. Now, if I wrote out 30 x's, how many pairs of x's would I have? Well, that's the same thing as dividing by 2. So that would be 15. So B. Okay, and then number 18, the bottom part here is a perfect square, so the square root of 49 is 7. Okay, so the only answer that has 7 is A. But for 40, we do need to break that down. So I could use 4 times 10, but 4 can break down to 2 and 2, and 10 can break down to 2 and 5. So I have a pair of 2s, so that's a 2 on the outside, and my leftovers get multiplied and put back on the inside. So yep, that does match to letter A.